Hello everyone. Welcome to Document Accessibility for Boards, Committees, and Commissions. My name is James Herndon, and I'm an accessibility consultant at Equal Entry. We do trainings like this, and we also do audits for accessibility on site systems, apps, VR experiences, and so on. And our goal with these trainings is to help people understand core concepts of accessibility. And in this training, we'll be looking specifically at how to make your BCC documents accessible to the widest possible range of your audience. For our agenda today, we're going to start with a kind of digital accessibility 101 overview. We will look at some common things you might see when you are trying to make a document accessible and how you might make that material accessible in Word or PDF and also on the web, because I know a lot of your meeting minutes and agendas are still published on the web. We're going to later look at an accessible Word template that Suzanne made, which you can cut and paste your content into to help ensure it is more likely to be accessible than it might have been in its original form. And we'll end by looking at how you can double-check the accessibility on that by running the automated accessibility checker in Word before you export it to a PDF. And then we'll finally wrap up with some key takeaways to summarize what we've looked at today. So let's start with Digital Accessibility 101. So I want you all, assuming you were cited, to imagine receiving this document as meeting minutes. It's probably a little tough to read and make sense of the content, right? You might notice, okay, there's this image at the top, this black square, but I have no idea what it is or what it means. And you may wonder, was there a different image here? Is this a placeholder? Is this just a mistake? And you may also notice that this text is styled to look the same. It's just one big block. And it's a bit tricky to scan through and understand the structure of the document. Now, obviously, nobody intentionally creates documents with this structure. However, this is often what it feels like for many people who rely on adaptive tech to receive an inaccessible document. Even when we visually style the document in such a way that it's easy to scan, people who rely on adaptive tech need their document to be formatted according to certain standards in order to read it so that it looks like this. Visual effects are communicated to not just us, but also to users of adaptive tech. Now, visually, it looks as if the line-by-line content has changed. There's different font sizes. Elements are laid out in certain places at certain sizes, colors, and so on. But again, those are only visual effects. To communicate those effects to people using adaptive technology like screen readers, we have to make those changes programmatically in Word. And we do that by using the tools built into our document editor. Now, this document has the exact same content as this document, but it has been properly structured so that the screen reader users can easily understand the content because it is what we might call machine readable. And as you can see, effective use of those programmatic tools makes the document easier to understand for sighted people too. I can scan through if I just want to know who was present at this meeting. Bam, very easy for me to find because the document is structured with headings, for example. So when our content is created to be machine readable, everyone benefits. So how do we make our documents and web pages machine readable? That's the question we're going to be answering today. We're going to look at, like I said, a few of the various aspects of digital accessibility and how we can follow accessibility best practices to ensure our digital content is compliant with the current standards. So let's begin with headings. How can headings make it easier for people with disabilities to navigate a document? The shortest answer is that headings make navigation easier because they allow screen reader users to jump around quickly. If you're a sighted person, you probably take it for granted that you can look for big bold text in a document and jump visually from big bold text to big bold text and so on, right? And you can figure out where you need to be in a document that way. And you can also use the navigation panel. So if someone has already set headings, someone who is blind, for example, can use the navigation pane to jump between headings. But if no headings have been set in the document, then that person will need to go through the document all the way from beginning to end potentially to find the information they want. Unless they want to do a Control F or Command F to find some keyword or phrase, but they might not know exactly what they're looking for, right? And there may be other information in there that they would like to reach, and it wouldn't occur to them to search for it, and so on. So as an accessibility rule, we definitely want to include headings in our documents to provide that equivalent experience. Just simply increasing the font size, that's effective if you're a sighted user, but that doesn't make the heading machine readable. Screen readers, for example, won't parse it as a heading, and therefore users who are blind will perceive it the same way as any other text. If they're in this meeting minutes document for the Adult Public Guardianship Review Board, this text, Adult Public Guardianship Review Board, will appear via screen reader to be the same as the date, the time, the members present. It will all flow as one block of text. It won't register as a unique section of the document. Now, if you want to set it programmatically, what you would do in Word is go to your Home tab, go into Styles, and then you have some preset options to specify text as heading level 1, heading level 2, and so on. And instead of simply making the text visually big and bold, if you use this feature, adaptive technologies can parse it as a heading, and blind users can perceive it as a heading and grasp a document in the same way sighted users can. Some of you may also know that if you have text that you would like to set according to certain fonts, colors, etc., you can highlight that text, and when you go to set a heading in the Styles menu, you can right-click on a heading and select Change Heading Level to match selection. And that'll ensure whether it's a heading 1 or heading 2 or any level, you can set that text to whatever format you might want and have that be registered as a programmatic heading. If you're on the web, you can do the same thing. You would just mark it up with an H1 tag. So here we have Adult Public Guardianship Review Board, and it's highlighted. And you can see here in the inspector, we have set it in the div as an H1 element, Adult Public Guardianship Review Board. So if I'm using a screen reader on the web, I'm going to get that same information as a heading, not just visually, but programmatically. Another common issue we encounter with accessibility involves images and whether or not they have alternative text set on them. They're also called non-text elements because it might not be just an image. It could be a logo, it could be a decorative border, it could be any number of things in a document that are not text. A lot of people obviously like their documents to be very visually oriented with lots of pictures, lots of design icons, and so on. So as document authors, the question we need to answer is, how do we make that non-text content accessible to people who are blind or low vision, for example? And the simplest way to do that is to add a text alternative via the alt text menu, which I'll show you in a moment. Or if an image is decorative, if it's just there for show, like a watermark, for example, it doesn't need to be communicated because it's not providing essential information. And if that's the case, then we can just mark it as decorative in that same alt text menu. And what that'll do is it will ensure screen readers skip it, and it won't be this mysterious piece of undescribed content in the document. I do want to take a moment to say not to use auto-generated text alternatives. Microsoft Office sometimes likes to show off that it can do that, and it is kind of cool that AI can now make some reasonably educated guesses about things that are in a picture or an image. But if you've ever really studied the examples of what AI comes up with, maybe you marvel that it said, photo of 10 different animals, one of them is a turtle. That's cool, but it's also not something that communicates the content very clearly, right? Especially because it doesn't tell you anything about the context in which an image is being used. The exact same image could have different alt text depending on the context in which it appears. And Microsoft Word AI won't tell you anything about that context. So again, the AI smoke and mirrors show can be cool sometimes, but it is not reliable, and I don't recommend using it. I'd recommend just writing your own clear, concise text. Some people get hung up on what's decorative and what's not. So I do want to take a minute to talk about that. When I'm saying that something is decorative, whether it needs alt text or not, it's usually a simple decision. There are some cases where you might not be sure what to do, but usually when you see something, you tend to know right away that it's decorative, that it doesn't have to be communicated in order for someone to understand the document, right? If you aren't sure, there's a free reference tool made available by the W3C called the Alt Decision Tree, and they have provided this rubric that you can follow in order to determine whether or not the type of image you have needs to be described based on what it's being used for. But in most cases, it won't be a mystery to you. If you're showing a picture of a place or people or something that is clearly communicating something visually other than just style, then you'd want to give it a text alternative for that. It needs a description. So in this meeting minutes document, the county logo is visually displayed, but it is missing the metadata to describe the image in text. So if I were to open this in a PDF and run the check, it would not come through to me and communicate the meaning of the image. It would fail the accessibility checker. So I need to add something to this image, like a text alternative, that will tell me what it is if I can't see the logo. In Microsoft Word, the way you would do that is to click on the image, open the context menu by right-clicking, and select View Alt Text. And then you can enter text to describe the image. Here I've entered County Seal, Montgomery County, Maryland, 1776. Again, I recommend avoiding the AI program to generate alt text for me unless you plan on immediately editing it so that it is precise. And if this were just a document border, a line separator, etc., this is where you could select Mark as Decorative. And that would tell Word to indicate programmatically that whatever image I've marked as decorative doesn't need to be announced by people using screen readers. On the web, I can add an alt attribute to an image element. So here in the HTML, I have an image element, I have a file source for that element, and then I have an alt attribute of Police Accountability Board logo. So if I'm on the web navigating this page, I will get the information in that logo. Next up is links. So here we have on a public meeting minutes page a long URL that has probably been cut and pasted into the page editor. Now I'm a sighted user, so it's easy for me to tell that it's a link to a calendar page. But I also want it to be easy for people using adaptive tech to understand it. So why would this be a problem the way it is? Well, try to imagine that you can't see any of the link text and it's read aloud to you verbatim. So you'll have an artificial voice saying http://www.montgomerycountymd.gov/boards, etc. For long URLs, it can take anywhere from 10 to 30 seconds to read the whole thing, and it's probably not something you're going to be able to retain in your mind while the screen reader is parsing that long URL. So as a document author, it's much better to use a link with a title like this one beneath the long one, Montgomery County Alternative Format Request Form. That link is titled, and therefore it can be announced very clearly and tell somebody using a screen reader the purpose of the link so they know where the browser will take them if they click on it. Otherwise, if they go to open, say, a links list and they want to navigate this calendar page by the external links available, it's not going to make as much sense if their screen reader is trying to announce or spell out a long URL instead of a link title. It won't be as clear to them how that link might be different from other links than it would be if you had used a link title. Like we said a moment ago, this is a great example, Montgomery County Alternative Format Request Form. If that's what my screen reader announces, I can be relatively confident that this link will take me to a form page where I can request information in an alternative format. Many of you probably know this one already, but in a Word document, when you paste in a long URL and press enter, it will automatically become a hyperlink. However, if you want to add a link title, you're going to type the link text, if there isn't already text in the document you'd like to use, then highlight that text and press Control-K or Command-K to open up the hyperlink menu. And that is where you will have the option to paste in the long URL and also verify the link text you would like to use for that particular document. Here in the screenshot, I've also shown that you can open the context menu by right-clicking and select Hyperlink. Next up is titles. So titles are different than a document file name. We might assume that the file name is sufficient, but many documents, especially PDFs, can be made more accessible if you add a meaningful programmatic title. The same goes for web pages. Here I have a meeting minutes document that doesn't have a programmatic title set, and Acrobat will flag that as a fail even though the document's file name might make sense. The reason it can't count the file name is that the checker doesn't have any way of knowing whether or not your file name is something clear, such as Adult Public Guardianship Review Board 1/21/2025, 1 to 3 p.m., or if it's something vague such as mm_308.pdf. The latter wouldn't make sense to somebody who is unable to read the document. It wouldn't tell them what type of information they're going to get in that specific document. And by forcing you to set a programmatic title, that's what they're trying to account for, that you've set some intention around what this document is and you've communicated its purpose clearly. In Word, before you export to a PDF, you can set a title by opening the File menu and selecting Properties. From there, you can add a title to the document. I'll show you an example here. I'm in Word. I open the File menu, and then I select Info. From there, I can add a title to the appropriate field. And then save my document. On Mac, it would look like this. After I select Properties, this Properties menu appears and I can set a title. Setting an author name is not required, but I do recommend you do so just for ease of transferring information within the county. If you search for a document and find it and you need to make some changes to it, if you have any questions about it or what's okay to change and what's not, having the author reference there can tell you who was the last person to edit it, and you know who to talk to if you have questions about future edits, past edits, and whatever you might need to know about that document.
And on the web, it's the same thing. You want titles to be not only short and descriptive, but also unique. In this example on the slide, we have multiple county pages, each with a different purpose, but each of the pages has been titled Montgomery County, Maryland. That wouldn't meet the standard for being one of a kind and uniquely distinguishable from one another. If I have multiple tabs open, then I want to be able to know that this tab refers to DEP, this tab refers to HR, this tab refers to TEBS, and so on. And then I'll know what tab I'm on at any given time.
Use of color. So using color as an informative tool is totally fine and can be very beneficial. The problem is when we use only color. When we do that, we're asking everyone who reads the document to be able to clearly distinguish between those colors. And of course, not everybody can do that. Now, in this example here, which I tweaked for pedagogical purposes, this is not a real meeting minutes form, but let's say you had a meeting minutes document in which you had the attendance list and the members present in person and remote were all set to red, and members who weren't there were set to blue, and staff present are in black. So if I read this as a sighted person who doesn't experience color blindness, I'm able to discern the differences between the categories. But for somebody with color blindness, this gets trickier. The same goes for somebody who might see the document in grayscale. They will experience more difficulty as well. There could be a couple of different solutions to that. The one I've proposed here is, again, it's totally fine to use color as long as there's a secondary means of communicating that information. So I'm communicating information with color here. Members present are shown in red, members not present are shown in blue, and staff present are shown in black. And also, members present is under a heading for members present. So if I'm using a screen reader, I can easily get there and know where I am. Then I have a bulleted list, and I know that everyone in this bulleted list under members present was in attendance. Likewise with members not present and staff present. So again, use of color represents a common accessibility scenario in which there is not anything wrong with communicating information a certain way, in this case by color. It's just that we need to ensure that it's not the only way because it's sensory dependent. And if it's not the only way, then it's going to exclude certain groups of users from being able to get the information that they need. So I want to take a minute to talk about some of the success criteria that's going to be relevant to your work if you're looking at Word and PDF documents. And just to close out the Digital Accessibility 101 part of this training, I want you to especially keep in mind these items in the Level A and AA column. These are the ones we really want to focus on for document accessibility. I've gone through several of them already, and then there are the AAA standards. These are standards that represent a more aspirational approach to accessibility. They're things that we could strive for, but they are not required. WCAG 2.0 level single A and AA is what you need to meet right now, and coming up in April of next year, you'll be expected to meet WCAG 2.1 single A and AA. And so for documents, that would include the non-text content that refers to the text alternative section we were talking about earlier, info and relationships, that covers the headings we were looking at, sensory characteristics. Let's say a document needed you to understand something is above or below or to the left or the right, etc. That type of information is dependent on somebody's ability to use a specific sense, like sight, in order to orient themselves in the document. We want to provide a secondary method of sharing that information, just like we would when we use color to convey information, which we talked about. Heading would be an example of a secondary means. We haven't talked about contrast. I can give you a brief summary of what that is. That involves making regular size text, that is to say text that's smaller than 18 point or 14 point bold, to contrast with its background at a ratio of at least 4.5 to 1. And if the text is larger than that, it needs to contrast at a ratio of 3 to 1. To test color contrast, you can use a free tool called WebAIM. It's a web application. You don't have to download it or get permission to install anything on your machine. And in WebAIM, I've got the foreground and a color picker for that, as well as one for the background. So for the foreground, I'll open the color picker. I'll select the eyedropper tool. I'll go up here and click on my slide heading. So now I have the hex value of that foregrounded blue color. The background is close to white, but you can tell it's slightly off-white, a very light blue. So again, it's best not to assume. I'll go ahead and use the dropper for the background. And with the exact values, I can see that WebAIM shows a contrast of 9.54 to 1, which meets the standard for big text and for regular size text. It's over 3 to 1, over 4.5 to 1. So I know that if this was in a document of mine for the county, it would be safe to distribute in terms of meeting the standard. All right, let's talk about our accessible Word template. This is a document that was made by Suzanne Brunhart-Wiggins, and it provides a way for you to take information that may be in your meeting minutes documents, information that has not already been remediated for accessibility, and cut and paste that information into the appropriate areas of this document. By doing that, you can help ensure that it's much more likely to be accessible. If you keep things in line with the format in this document, it should be totally accessible. So I've got the county logo at the top. If I use the method described earlier to view the alt text, click on it, open the context menu, select View Alt Text. I can see the alt text value here, County Seal, Montgomery County, Maryland, 1776. I've got a top-level heading, Name of Montgomery County Board. You could change this to the name of your specific board, and it would still be a level 1 heading. The same goes for the date. We also have heading sets for the meeting location, the mission, the attendance, members present, members not present, proof of quorum, staff present, guests, guest speakers, handouts, call to order. This meeting was called to order at time. You could set the time here. Welcome and introductions, review and approval of previous meeting minutes, review and approve meeting agenda, meeting minutes agenda items. This is an ordered list where you can switch out the items here and paste in any that you might want to include. And then likewise for next meeting, you can fill in the date and time for that, as well as the adjournment time. And if there are any things in this template that you don't know what they would be for your board, or they don't apply to your board, you can just delete them and just keep what's relevant to your board. If you need to add things that are not in this template but need to go in your meeting minutes, you can reach out to Chris Daniel, Suzanne Bernhardt-Wiggins, or anyone on their team, and they can help you adjust this template that will keep it compliant and accessible for you. Let's look at an example of how someone might fill out the template. Here we have a meeting minutes document for the Adult Public Guardianship Review Board. This is a PDF document, and I want to make this document accessible using the template I showed you a moment ago. And if we take a look at it, we can see the time, the board members present, the board members absent, and others in attendance. A lot of the things for which there are placeholders in the meeting minutes template that I shared earlier. So what I can do is go through this Adult Public Guardianship Review Board document and paste the text into the appropriate parts of the accessible template. And after you paste in all of the relevant content, you want to run the accessibility checker in Word just to make sure that everything is working appropriately. Now, exporting from Word to PDF and distributing that PDF should be a last resort. I recommend using HTML for distribution if you're not going to use Word, because HTML is one of the most accessible and robust formats. If something can be shared as a web page, then it's ideal to do so because it's so much easier in terms of your workload to make a web page accessible as opposed to a PDF. In PDFs, it can be rather cumbersome to work with the tags tree and to try to get everything just so in order to meet that WCAG 2.1 standard. However, if you have to go that route, then this would be the way to do it. In Word, you would open the Review tab. From there, you select Check Accessibility. And in this example, the results panel indicates that there were no issues found. If there were problems with accessibility in this document, they would all be flagged here, and it would tell me exactly where each issue was and what I needed to do to fix them. But since I used the accessible template, I don't have to do any remediation. I just paste the content in the appropriate place, run the checker, and I've passed.
There's also an accessibility checker in Acrobat. Now let's say I have the original Adult Public Guardianship Review Board PDF and I needed to make that accessible. The easiest solution would be to edit the source document in Word and then re-export to a PDF. But if I don't have access to the source document, this is what I would do. In Acrobat, I'd go up to All Tools and select it. I would then go down to View More. Then I would scroll down to Prepare for Accessibility. Select that. Then check for accessibility and keep the defaults just as they are. Finally, I select Start Checking. It looks as if in this original meeting minutes PDF, there's no alternate text on the Montgomery County logo. However, it does look as if most of the document is passed, right? The reading order and color contrast need manual checks like they always do, but other than that, everything is great. However, we should keep in mind that this logical reading order check can be deceptively labor intensive. If we go through the document and we look at the tags, you can see that the first tag here is just a blank space. That's not a huge deal, but it's something we would change or get rid of. Then the reading order goes up to the image above that space. Then we go to this heading, which is marked as a paragraph, and then we have another blank space and so on. For accessibility compliance, I'm going to have to go through and fix each and every one of these. So just because the checker in Acrobat indicates that the document looks mostly good, there's going to be a lot of work involved in trying to make it accessible compared to simply making your source document accessible. In this case, using the accessible Word template and then exporting to PDF. Back in Word, on the new meeting minutes document that we made, I'm going to open the Acrobat tab. I'm going to select Create PDF and Run Action, and then Make Accessible. I'll save it to my desktop. Then I'll run the checker on this PDF. I can follow the steps I described earlier, but if this Use Guided Actions panel has popped up for you, you can just go down to Run Accessibility Full Check. Leave the defaults as they are, select Start Checking. And it's already much better. As you can see, it didn't flag any page content. It just automatically flagged the same two manual checks it always flags: logical reading order and color contrast. In the tags panel, we have this blank P tag to remove. Not a big deal. Then we have a figure with a text alternative. Then we have an H1. The heading is correctly labeled. The tags are already in much better shape, and there's much less work to do on my end to turn this into a fully accessible document because I used the meeting minutes accessible template. So let's do a quick review of that process. To run the checker in Word, you go to the Review tab and then select Check Accessibility. If a secondary menu pops up, just select Check Accessibility again. If you've just pasted text into the template, then the checker should say, "Looks good, no issues found." Depending on the version of Word you're using, you may have the option to check Best for Electronic Distribution and Accessibility. Go ahead and check that if you are prompted with it. And then in Acrobat, as I showed before, you go to All Tools and scroll down to Prepare for Accessibility, Check for Accessibility, start your checking, and if you run it, hopefully you'll just see the document auto-flag the same two issues it always flags: logical reading order and color contrast. And then you can just do a quick manual check of the tags to ensure that everything went through okay. So I want to end with just a couple of key takeaways. With respect to accessible formats, Word can pretty successfully replicate HTML markup. However, in terms of accessibility, web is generally going to be the preferred medium, and I recommend defaulting to it if you can. I know you may be required to send out documents in some cases, but if you're not using Word, then the web is very robust in terms of ongoing accessibility support. So if you can, defer to providing your content via web in HTML rather than in a PDF, because using PDFs, even in the best case scenario, like using the Word template exported to PDF method that I just showed, you're still going to have to do some manual tag editing. And I know for a lot of you that may feel burdensome and technical and maybe, beyond your skill set, but you'd still be obligated to do it under the WCAG 2.1 level AA standard that local governments are going to be held to starting in April of 2026. And so just to spare yourself that trouble, I recommend putting it in Word or putting it in HTML. The second key takeaway is before you share a document, run the automated accessibility checker that I showed you how to use, and review the WCAG success criteria checklist and make sure that you haven't forgotten any of those standards as you're working on the document, which will help ensure that it's easily understood by the widest variety of users. The accessible meeting minutes template that I shared earlier should be available to you on the portal. You can download and use it to build your own accessible meeting minutes documents. And we'll also have an accessible meeting agenda template as well for you to use in your work. And like the meeting minutes template, it's very easy to just cut and paste text into. And that's it. Thank you so much for your time today.